Hello, everyone, and welcome to Emotional Grit, the podcast where you can learn about the power of perspective and the science that fuels us. I'm your host, Jennifer Fernjack, and I'm excited to say that my guest today is Aurelien. He has served in countries all over the world and also in the US, including all five of the Great Lakes in the winter. So, phenomenal example of perspective. So, please feel free to like and subscribe to the podcast on YouTube at my Emotional Grit channel, and we'll go ahead and get things started. So Aurelien, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, and I'm going to apologize up front. I know that you're from France, so of course your ability to speak French is just awesome. Mine, not so awesome. So I know that I'm mispronouncing your name. How do you pronounce your name correctly in full?
My name is Aurelien Bouche-Pillon.
All right. Well, I'm glad that you just said it. I know that if I tried again, I would mess it up. So I'm very grateful to have you here today. So as I just mentioned, you obviously have done a lot of surfing at different places around the world, including, as I mentioned, the five Great Lakes in the winter, which is going to surprise most people. So I'm wondering, how did you first get into surfing?
Well, I always wanted to surf. Funny enough, we all have, a calling for different hobbies or passion, and one of mine was I wanted to surf at a very early age. That I was drawn by surfing and by the ocean. So that's always something I wanted to do, or was something that I was passionate about, and I tried to learn on magazine and learn on my bed, on my pillow, and I was imagining that I was surfing a wave, and then my pillow was a surfboard, and I always told my friends I want to go surf, and I got lucky to, be able to travel from where we were living to the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean in France, and I immediately jumped on a board when I arrived in the ocean and started surfing, and that was just, the sport that changed my life and really made me a better person and gave me perspective on life and kept me fit and kept me happy and healthy and during harder time of my life. And um, yes, so that's the story behind surfing.
That's fantastic. So when did you start surfing in the winter? I know most people associate surfing with a warm climate. So to do it in the winter for most people is unthinkable. So
Mhm.
what got you started with that?
Yes, well, we always do what we don't think we are able to do or capable of doing. And when I moved to United States, I was able to, appreciate the Great Lakes for where they were and realize how much of a body of water and how big it is. And I was drawn to it and didn't realize the full potential of how much we could serve them, and how much, involvement was for surfing in the Great Lakes. And, what was what was needed to do that. But I quickly learned about it and jumped in it and realized that the best surfing season was actually in the fall and the winter when it gets cold. But I didn't realize how cold it gets because it does get cold.
Absolutely. So is there like a temperature where you're going, no, you know what, this is too cold for me to surf? Or are you kind of like, no, you know what, I'll put on a dry suit or a wetsuit and do it anytime?
Yeah, no, I mean rally. I will say no. Like tomorrow, for example, is a great example. It's going to be, I think, 17 degrees with a wind chill and maybe 0 degrees or more. The wave is supposed to be from the west. It won't be like an amazing surfing day, but I have friends who just texted me today, said, "Hey, Aurelien, you want to come surfing tomorrow morning?" And I said, "No, I'm good." And the reason why is because it's going to be an hour and a half commute from where I am to the wave that I was invited to surf, and the roads are not going to be safe, and I'm not expecting the wave to be anything like spectacular, and it's going to be particularly cold. So can I do it? Yes. Would I do it? Absolutely. Sometime my point to that is sometime it may not be totally worth it. So I think I'm, growing up a little bit and being a little more mature and wiser, I tend to make sure that at least I'm going to be able to surf and have fun and have a quality wave. Um, but no, the weather is not the reason why I will say no. Or the temperature is more like, am I going to get cold for something rewarding?
Right.
If that makes any sense.
So do you ever do it by yourself, or is it kind of like, no, you know what, it's cold outside, I better make sure I have a surf buddy with me in case something happens?
Surfing buddies are great. I had a lot of them here. I'm new to Michigan, but I spend most of my time upstate New York surfing by myself in spots that were, not meant to really be surfed, and in private properties. I made friends with people to access waves that I thought were amazing, and I spent a lot of, hundred of hours surfing in the Great Lakes by myself, mainly on Lake Ontario. But no, I surf often by myself. It's fun. It's good for the soul. But I have great buddies too, and it also is fantastic to surf with friends.
So I'm not sure if you've heard this term before or not, but when I was doing research for our podcast tonight, I came across it. So whether it's you sometimes or one of your friends, do any of you ever have a beard? And if so, when you're surfing, do you ever get what's called beardsicles? They're icicles that hang from a beard.
Yeah, so there's a surfer that kind of started that trend. His name is Surfer Dan, and he lives in Minnesota actually. Actually, he lives in Marquette on Lake Superior. But uh, and he captured picture of him with his eye, I mean his beard covered of ice and all that. But that happened by default. It doesn't necessarily even need to be always very cold for that to happen. It's just the water freezing on your face. But it does look terrifying for the outside world, and it looks super cool and mystic and mysterious. And myself, I have some pictures that are quite magnificent, and I will show my kids later on in life, and I will keep that, covered with ice. But it doesn't always mean that it was that cold. But yes, it happened. And it's actually quite annoying sometimes because it's heavy and it bothers you, and it takes time for it to melt when you go back to your car. But it's definitely usually subject to good conversation and great selfies. It's a cool way to pick up a girl if you're single.
Oh, for sure. I could see that. I could
Yeah.
see that. So, as I mentioned before we started the interview, I live in Minnesota and I've been here most of my life, although for a couple of years when I was in junior high, my family and I lived in Alaska. So it was also a cold climate. But I've learned over the years kind of to have a hardy mindset, kind of like, and I wrote about this in my book, but it's like when you can't not experience something, you learn to figure out the how. And part of that could just be the weather. And so with the cold climate, you learn to tough it out. You can learn that certain things are mind over matter and you can still enjoy yourself. So even just talking about you pursuing your passion of surfing in the cold weather, it also makes me think of people in Wisconsin who go to Packer games. I mean, I went to a Packers game one time at Lambeau Field because years ago I was dating someone who was really into football and loved the Packers. And I remember before the game started, we were at like a party out in the parking lot of the Brett Favre Steakhouse. So this is a long time ago. And in the tent with a beer garden, they had a band that was playing, and it was so cold outside, you could actually see the breath of the guy that was singing. And the guy who was playing the keyboards was wearing cut off gloves, but he still kept playing the keyboard and whatever. And then once we got into the stadium for the game, people were wearing their hunting gear. It could have been like a pair of like thick Carhartt bibs or a camouflage coat or a bright orange hat. And it was and again, you could see your breath, but nobody cared because their love for the game was greater than their disdain for the cold. And it was interesting kind of how it's like mind over matter. And I would imagine that with surfing, it's probably similar to that in that obviously there's icicles there for a reason. But when you mentioned earlier that surfing is good for the soul, like what do you mean by that? Like what's kind of the mindset you have to have when doing it in the winter?
Well, first of all, I can relate to the football and the passion and the tailgaters because we can talk about that later. But I have a great analogy, and I have a great like something that I'm working on in my life that is as a cold water surfer made me realize that there are a lot of other people embracing the cold who are
Yeah.
passionate and will brave the elements just to do something that is good for the soul. So what I mean by it's good for the soul, it's you're gonna think out of the box. You're just gonna stretch your comfort zone, and if you don't do that, nothing is really truly, you know, fun and exciting and thrilling and rewarding or even testful. It's just I think life is when you're outside that comfort zone. That's when you learn about yourself. That's when you become stronger. That's when you're capable of doing what you think you're not capable of, and that's usually in those moments where you capitalize on all your strengths and emotionally, spiritually, and physically. And I think we need that in business, in relationship, in everything, especially in the world that we live in, where most people are drawn to be inside and sitting on the computer and everything is on
Mhm.
technology. And you can just go and surf a wave just by watching Instagram and get get excited by watching somebody else surfing, right? There are
Oh
people
yeah.
making a living by make you follow them, and they are the one living. And for me, I don't want
Right.
to be the one living. And I think that there's parallel between surfing and cold water surfing and braving, your fears and doing, thinking out of the box and doing different things that's just the attitude that we should have in life, because whatever we do that is comfortable is usually is not going to bring us what we need in life at every
Yeah.
level, every aspect of, emotionally, spiritually, and physically, and
Because
financially.
if you're too comfortable, you're not feeling like you achieved anything. Whereas like for you with surfing in the winter, I imagine you look at it as kind of an adventure or kind of a challenge. Like, hey, you know what? Yeah, it's cold outside today, but I'm not going to not surf. I'm going to go do it anyway. And I would imagine that that mindset, to your point, can carry over into business. I know for me, hence the whole name here of my podcast that I have behind me here, and my book, and my speeches deal with emotional grit as well. It's a whole idea of figuring out the how. And I think part of what helped me with my brain tumor scare, because in 2016 I had surgery for a brain tumor, and that's what inspired the book and the podcast and what have you. But the mindset that I got from growing up in a cold climate, where it's, you know what, you can kind of sit back and complain that it's cold, or grab a shovel and just go take care of the driveway. Like just figure it out and just do it, And I know that there are people here in Minneapolis where if they want to go biking in the winter, they'll ride a fat tire bike, so the tires might be this thick, for a bike, but you're not going to not go biking. You just go. And at other times there are people who use the cold to their advantage, like perhaps turning on. A lot of people around here have cars with heated seats because of the cold. So if you go get takeout, put the takeout on your seat during your commute home, and then turn your seat on. And the heat then keeps your food warm. So the things that you have can serve multiple purposes in that regard. And there are also places around here where you can go to a driving range and hit golf balls while you're standing under a heat lamp, hit golf balls into the snow. Because people who want to golf want to still be able to go to a driving range in the winter. So you just figure it out. You just hit them into the snow. So it's a great mindset that you're personifying with your surfing as well. But now with the Great Lakes, or say even just Lake Michigan, because that's where you are now. How high on average can the waves get in the winter?
Well, surprisingly, the wave gets really large. uh, there's more wreck in the Great Lakes than most places, and there's more ship that have sunk on Lake Michigan, Lake Superior, than many of the other lakes, I believe. And I think it's like, I want to say like 30,000. I mean, I can't remember the quantity of ship that went down over the time. I'm not talking just the past 30 years. I'm talking the past hundred of years.
Yeah,
Uh,
lots of ships.
a lot of life were lost. So my point is the wave get 20, 25, feet easily. It's not the wave,
Wow.
because there's not 25 feet wave onshore. You can divide usually by 2 or 3 onshore. But realistically, I think the biggest wave I've seen on the Great Lakes were probably like onshore, and I would say 15 feet. You know,
Wow.
and the biggest wave I've surfed personally, maybe 10 feet in
Okay.
the lake.
Okay.
The Great Lake surfer have a tendency to be very excited and exaggerate, because the fact that
Ah,
we have is a miracle. So we have a tendency to see that the wave were that big, but they were not always that big. I'm very
right.
conservative. I try to be realistic, even so I still get really excited. But I think the average wave in the Great Lakes when it comes to surfing in the fall and the winter is usually around 5 feet.
Okay.
You get 6, 7, 8 feet. Easily.
Wow. So what would you say the biggest challenge is with surfing in the winter?
To keep doing it. It's like everything in
Yeah.
life. You get comfortable. Um, you know, it's easy to just don't do it. It's the commute. It's a lot of work. It's the commute. It's the drive in the snow. It's just the suiting up and then finding the right place, and sometimes surfing, and it's cold, but it's not always that fun because the wave may not be that good, and you get disappointed because the forecast show a certain size and you expect something and then it's not that good. But just you do it still, and you always feel better when you come out of the water. It doesn't matter if it was a 1 foot wave, a 2 feet wave, it's just always feel better.
Oh yeah. Plus, I would think kind of getting off the grid a little bit like that, like getting away from your computer, getting away from traffic, getting away from just people in general, and just being out there in the elements has to be pretty exciting, I would think.
It's outstanding. It gives you a good perspective on life and where you live, and it's just cleaning for the soul. And I personally always, feel better. And
Oh yeah.
yes, it's important to me, and I couldn't, I have to be outside, and I can't wait it to be warm to be outside. If not, I will spend 6 months, waiting.
Right. Do you think that this mindset you have of being able to get out in the cold and go surfing and get out there and kind of pursue your passion, do you think that's something that you were born with, or do you think it's a reflection of how you were raised, or kind of a combination of both?
It's a good question. I was never asked that question. I couldn't really answer that, except that it's maybe something that I became. But I always went to surf. I always needed to surf. I always needed the water in my life, very importantly, psychologically, spiritually, emotionally. The water represents peace. And I had a turbulent childhood, and like many of us, right, divorced parents and a lot of dysfunction. And I was, I had a lot of experiences in my life in places and with all kind of contexts, and I could write a book. So I think that the surfing allowed me to control my life and my destiny, and this unbalance, funny enough, the fact to be balanced on a board and controlling something that is always moving and changing allowed me to feel like in control. So I think that's the whole idea for me. That's what it kind of translates to. But I don't know, um, you know, like I think surfing in the cold and braving the elements. I don't know if it's just something I had in me. But we all have what we need to do in life. It's just, do we develop it, and in which context, right? And
Oh
which
yeah.
trip. For me, I was just upstate New York, looking at a big lake, and I'm like, I'm gonna surf this thing, and I don't
Good for
care. I'm
you.
gonna
Good
go
for you.
do it.
I think that so much of life is about perspective. I know that I travel a fair amount for work, and so it's interesting how, depending on where I am in the country, it makes a difference in how things are presented on TV. So, for example, I'll be most places where I'm traveling. If I'm watching a news program and they're talking about the forecast, the meteorologist might say, "Oh yeah, well, and it's supposed to rain today, or rain tomorrow," and people are kind of like, "Oh man." But when I'm in like Iowa or parts of Minnesota, the meteorologist on TV is like, "Hey, we're supposed to get some rain today." Well, it's because they have crops that are growing, so it's not the presence of the rain that's the problem. It's how people perceive it that makes a difference. And
No,
I think back to when I was growing up. I'm from a very small town in northern Minnesota, and up by Lake Superior. And when I was growing up, I was a hockey cheerleader in high school, and the arena in which people played hockey didn't have any heat. So just like those people that I talked about at the Packers games that still go there now without heat, our ice arena for hockey didn't have any heat. And I heard the locker rooms didn't have any heat either. And so, there are people who might say, "Oh, I feel bad for those kids back then. They must have been at some kind of a disadvantage when it came to play." And really it was quite the opposite. People viewed it as a challenge. And that was the only world that we knew. And so there was one guy who went on to play for the LA Kings with Wayne Gretzky. Two other guys went to play down in Dallas and won the Stanley Cup. So yeah, so when you can kind of view things as a challenge and then accept that challenge for what it is and move forward, it's pretty empowering. So I can see I can see what you're saying. But you had mentioned earlier that you've surfed in different countries. What are some of those countries?
yes, I mean, I surf in France, of course. I've surfed in Spain. I surfed in Portugal. I surfed in Greece. I
Wow.
surfed in Costa Rica. I surfed in Nicaragua. I surfed in Morocco, in Africa. I surfed in China. That was an amazing experience. Probably one of the nicest experience. The most like, and I don't know, and just authentic and weird in a way. So but there are
Wow.
so many other places I want to surf. I like to surf in Iceland. I want to surf in Alaska. Um, and yes, and in the lakes, I there's a few spots in the Gray Lake that I have not surfed that I would like to surf. So I still have plenty of of fun to have. And I'm also doing the surfing Santa every year. I'm about to do that again, and it's a tradition I started for myself to, and then I'm pushing myself to do it every year. Why I dress up as a Santa is to encourage people to have fun during the holidays and believe in great things, and and push yourself, and surfing and Santa for me are both together a great
That's
combination.
awesome.
Did the surfing Santa on Lake Ontario. I did the surfing Santa on Lake Erie. I did the surfing Santa on Lake Michigan. So I would like
That's
to
so
do
cool.
surfing Santa in the five Great Lakes too. So that's one of my goals.
Wow.
Mhm.
So when you have surfed, whether it's in Canada or China, as you mentioned, or other places, was there anything that surprised you? Like things that maybe you hadn't heard about before, or things that just kind of took you by surprise, I guess.
No, except that all over the world is looking for the same thing, the same happiness, and we're all the same, and we share the water and the elements the same way. And surfers have that in common. But in China, it was amazing because the place I surfed, I think some of them never seen somebody surfing, and they jump on me and they touch my board, and they were swimming and around me, and on the beach they took a picture of me, and they were super confused about what I was doing and how was that possible. And surfing in China actually starting to develop more and more every year. And then they even had, I think, a Chinese surfer in the Olympics, if I'm not making a mistake. But they have a wave pool now, and they have surfing teams, and it's been growing a lot through the years. But at the time I went, it was still fairly, new, and something that people didn't see. So, but yeah, surfing is a language, and it's no different than food, you know, or if religious and you go, I don't know, whatever religion you are, and then you go to another country and they have a church that match the belief that you have, and you feel home. So I think the main thing all over the world, people will serve just that, people, seeking for peace, and an activity that they love. And
Oh
I
yeah.
think surfing is a little bit more than just a sport. I mean, it's a culture, it's a lifestyle, and it's a philosophy. But Great Lakes surfing itself is really more a hardcore community, and it's surfing to the next level because it requires so much more gear and work and patience, and the elements being so cold. I don't think there are too many people in the world surfing in cold climate like we do. So it make it even more special, and it make it
Oh
like
yeah.
people are quite, you know, interesting from all walk of life. And maybe you think I'm cool, but I'm just one of them. There are thousands of other cool people around the Great Lakes.
Well, now when you mentioned that surfing has its own language, is there a term for people who surf in the winter?
Not that I know.
Oh.
Crazy bastards.
Besides crazy, right?
um,
That's funny.
no, I mean, no. Cold water surfer, Great Lake surfer. Um, you surf the Great Lakes. If you want to surf, you got to surf in the cold. So it is what it is. And sometimes it gets too cold for some people, and you see them when it's fall, and in the winter you don't see them, and that's okay. We don't judge.
Right,
Um,
right.
but yes, if you want to surf in the Great Lakes, you gotta brave the cold. The cold is healthy. I mean, you see the growing culture, and around cold water deep and cold plunge, and you see people jumping in the water, and because they think it's good for them, and people do it, and all kind of people from all kind of walk of life, genders and
Oh
size, and
yeah.
go and do the cold plunge, and make them feel better emotionally and spiritually, probably more spiritually and emotionally than physically, truly, because the cold waters can be painful, but it's the way you feel after you do it, right?
Absolutely. There was someone who I interviewed on my podcast a couple of months ago, who lives in Alaska. I interviewed her because she has beautiful red hair, and we talked about the genetics of how that can affect pain perception and things. But she also talked about doing cold water dives, for lack of a better term, where she goes in cold water, and the health benefits of it. So I'm sure that if I was to tell her that you want to go to Alaska to go surfing, which I assume is probably when it's going to be cold outside, she would go, "All right, he's one of my people," because it's
Yeah, not
just
you visit
a
neither,
mindset,
but that's gotta be great.
But now, is there anything that I haven't asked about that I should be? Any stories you want to throw in, or examples of perspective or things about the sport in general?
I mean, I can add a few things that comes in mind. The first thing is I like to remind people wherever you are, you can make the best out of it. It doesn't matter if it relates to surfing or it relates to, it doesn't matter really truly what the activity is, if it's a physical activity or art and craft or learn a language. But the body and the mind has to be in action, and we have so much in us, and we designed to be strong and active in every dimension. And I think I'm a firm believer that the society that we live in today is pushing you to do everything else than moving and stretching your comfort zone, but more to be complacent than being behind the screen. And I
Yeah.
think, as humans, we were coming back to surfing or outdoor activity. We are meant to live in motion with nature, regardless of the climate. And the analogy of surfing in the cold weather and pushing our boundaries, it goes beyond that. It's just, okay, let's go outside and let's move and let's be in motion and let's be healthy from generation to generation. We were not designed to be sitting and to be watching a screen.
Right.
And I think, yes, we live in climates in some places that are cold, but the truth is, um, especially those days, I mean, we have amazing gears and clothes, and there's no reason for people to don't go outside. And it could be just walking the dog for 5 minutes. So, but it's good for the mind, it's good for the body, and I think at the end of the day, it makes us better people, and it brings smile and joy. And we meet fantastic people when you go outside. People walking their dog, people cross country skiing, you name it. As long as people do it safely, I think it's all good. So I think wherever people are, I think people should embrace where they are. And yes, do I want to live in a place that have a winter for 6 months all my life? No, I think I'll be one of those people one day where I'll say, you know what? Funny enough, I was just talking, I think, to my daughter. I was myself complaining about the weather because actually, funny enough, I don't like when it gets gray and it rains. When there's no sun and it gets
Yeah.
gray and it gets dark so soon that if I work my business or my job and I don't have time to go outside, I go absolutely crazy. And I feel like I wasted my day. And I'm grumpy sometimes because I'm like, I didn't even have time to walk. I didn't have time to surf. I didn't have, and it's already dark and it's gray and there's no sun. And she was telling me, but Aurelien, it's just the weather we are in. It's just what it is. It's all good. And she reminds me about that perspective, right? But we
Right.
use where you are. But honestly, one day I'd be fine not surfing the Great Lakes. I'd be totally fine surfing in the ocean where it's a little bit, a more consistent wave and maybe a milder climate. But I will also, that's why I told my daughter, I said, well, one day I surf somewhere else, but I would have earned it because maybe I complain about the cold, but I've probably spent more time in the cold than any other human I know. So my point is there's a time for everything. And I think right now
Yes.
I am, and I'm embracing it. And it's part of who I am. It's my identity. But there are moments where it's not always easy. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm just a human, and sometimes I'm cold, and sometimes I don't want to get in my suit, and sometimes I don't want to change, and sometimes I don't want to drive in the snow, and sometimes I don't want to jump in the lake in the winter. But I always am a better person when I come out.
Well, and it's empowering to know that maybe you thought initially, oh, it might not be ideal, but rather than have it own it, or rather than have it own you, you own it. Kind of like, hey, you know what? Yeah, it's not ideal today, but I'm going to go do it anyway. And I imagine it's probably pretty empowering, even after you get off the lake, just kind of knowing like what you just did and thinking about that. And I know that as far as trying to embrace the cold, it's interesting how, again, having grown up with it, I've learned different ways to do that myself, and I've watched other people do the same thing. There's a story that I wrote about in my book that a lot of the listeners know, but obviously you don't. So, my sophomore year of college, again up in northern Minnesota, with the cold winds off of Lake Superior. I was running late for class and I couldn't find my mittens anywhere. So I'm looking for my mittens around the house, can't find them. My roommates can't find them. And I thought, well, okay, I can't not go to school. I've got to figure this out. So I put socks on my hands. I thought that's my contingency plan. Well, then I got outside and my car doors were frozen shut because it was so cold outside. So again, I thought, well, I can't not go to school. I've got to figure this out. So thankfully, I had the presence of mind to go to the back of my car, and somehow I jimmied open the hatchback. I crawled over the spare tires wearing my socks on my hands, and I drove to school. Well, I got to the lecture hall where the class was. I'm telling people about the socks, and people are laughing. Well, there was one guy that sat back in his chair and he goes, Jennifer, that's nothing. And I said, oh, really? He goes,
Hmm.
yeah, see that guy over there? And I went, yeah. He goes, he had to actually walk to school today in this cold weather and he couldn't find his mittens, so he wore oven mitts. So some guy walked to school wearing oven mitts. And I thought, did I just get upstaged by oven mitts? But it's a great example of how you can figure out the how, and it just is what it is. And you can't change it. So you might as well just roll with it. And just
That's a great
and
for sure.
it was really, really interesting, and I also have friends who enjoy going ice fishing. Have you ever been ice fishing?
No, actually, I mean, actually, I did one time. I went to see a friend, uh,
Okay.
but I see them a lot on Lake Ontario, where I used to live because I used to live on the bay of Lake Ontario in Aronicoi Bay, and it will freeze up, and people will go and they will go ice fishing. So I've witnessed it and seen it, and I think
Okay.
it's cool. And
Yeah, people who like it love it, but people who aren't interested in it are kind of like, well, that's kind of crazy. But I know a few years ago I went with a friend of mine and her husband and their children. And so we got into their SUV. Her husband's driving, I'm sitting in the passenger seat, and then my friend and her kids were in the back. And without any kind of a warning or explanation, I hear her husband say, "Okay, you guys, put your windows down." And it's the middle of the winter. So as he's telling people to put down their windows, he's opening up the sunroof or moonroof or whatever it was. And then he also reminded all of us to not wear our seatbelts. And I thought, where is he going with this? So all of a sudden he starts driving over the frozen lake to get to their ice house or fish house, as we call it, where people it's like a little man cave or a fort where you can sit there and although they can be pretty nice nowadays, but that's where we were going to go because there was a hole in the ice within the ice house to go fishing. And I found out that the reason why we weren't supposed to wear our seatbelts and the reason why the windows were all down now and the moonroof is open or the sunroof is because if the SUV broke through the ice and we would have ended up in the lake, it would be a way to escape the car. And so I
oh my,
thought, I thought, wow, what a great example of you figure out the how. They weren't going to not go ice fishing. It was just a matter of just figuring it out. And there are people who go through with, I think they're called augers first to see how thick the ice is. So you're not being stupid about it, but there's still risk. And that's why without even flinching, her husband was just like, "Hey, you guys, don't forget, take your seatbelts off and put your windows down." But when you want to pursue your passion, you figure it out. You're still smart about it, but you just figure it out. And just like you with surfing.
it's funny
So
you said it because I always refuse to cross the bay walking, and I always refuse to go on a car. Like people say, well, you jump in the lake. It's a lot more scarier than that. And like, no, I'm good. The
yeah,
idea of the ice,
yes.
collapsing under me, it's something that I just did not like.
Everybody kind of has their risk level, their risk tolerance,
Like,
and you kind of
but the
figure
thing
out what
is, if I'm in control, I'm good. If I'm not in
yes.
control, I'm not controlling the ice. I'm not saying I control the lake or the wave, but somehow I can maneuver around it and do things. But like the ice, if the ice goes, there's not much you can do about that.
Yeah, yeah, except for escape from your car. So
So no seatbelt. I remember that one.
yeah, exactly. So all right. Well, unless you have anything else you wanted to add, we can go ahead and wrap things up. But any additional anecdotal kind of stuff you want to
I mean,
share with
I could
people?
like say something like very quickly. That's funny. You brought that analogy to football many, many times, and I'd like to tell you that I have a business that I make all-weather jackets, and those
Really?
all jackets are designed for surfers when they get in and out of the water to change and stay warm, and people will do cold plunging. So I started a business based on the elements and braving the element and being warm, and one day I went to when I lived upstate New York, I went to the Bills game, the Buffalo Bills, and it was in January, and I mean it was cold and it was snowing, and people were outside. I think 65,000 people outside cheering for the team, and that day I realized, wow, those people are more passionate and more extreme and more hardcore, and I give them more respect than me because I'm going surfing for myself because I want to, and I'm getting the reward. But those people, they're not getting paid to, they're watching people who are getting paid millions of dollars
Right,
and
right, right.
don't even really know they're here. They're paying for their ticket. They are cold. I mean, when I say cold, it's miserable, but they are smiling and having fun. And I felt like
Yes,
people were
yes,
the most dedicated people on the planet. And that day I
yes,
had so much respect for tailgaters and football fans that it changed my
yes.
vision of everything. And more importantly, I'm now making jacket on the color of the Bills fan. and I've been making jackets for football team here in Frankfurt, Michigan, and I make jackets for tailgaters and people. So my point is like it's funny that you made that analogy because I used to make jackets for surfers, and then I realized there are a lot of more people than me in the surfing people in the surfing community embracing the outdoors and who deserve to stay warm. So that's funny enough that I have a business based on that.
Wow. So if people want to learn more about your business or possibly get one of the products, how can they find them?
Yeah, well, it's called All Dry. So it's spelled AULL dash dry, All Dry. And so that's what we do. All weather jackets made of sustainable, recycled plastic bottle, and it's designed to keep people warm in the elements. Funny enough.
That's interesting. Cool. Well, we'll go ahead then and have a link to the website as part of this episode here.
Mhm. I appreciate
So
that. It's funny that
that
you
that
mentioned football because, yes, football fans are remarkable.
yeah. Wow. That's fantastic. Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. I heard about what you were doing for so long through a mutual friend, and now I'm so grateful that to meet you and to hear some of these stories firsthand. So I really appreciate this, and to all the listeners out there, thank you for being here as well. As I mentioned earlier, please feel free to go to my YouTube channel at Emotional Grit to like and subscribe to the podcast. And well, we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.